The air in Kingsley's, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, carried the weight of wealth and expectation. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over polished mahogany tables, where the city's elite dined on dishes with names as intricate as their lives. Conversations hummed, a symphony of power and privilege, until a sudden silence descended, heavy and absolute. Cutlery paused mid-air, wineglasses hovered, and dozens of eyes turned toward a small clearing between the tables. 10-year-old Lucas Montgomery stood trembling, his legs encased in metal braces that gleamed under the restaurant's lights. His hands, small and hesitant, reached out toward Diana Johnson, the only black waitress in the establishment. The live pianist had just begun a gentle melody, and Lucas, caught in a rare moment of impulse, had asked her to dance. His voice, soft but clear, had cut through the restaurant's murmur like a blade. "Sir, control your son," snapped Mr. Thornton, the restaurant manager, his voice sharp enough to slice through the tension. "This is inappropriate. This is not a dance hall, and our employees are not here to entertain children." Richard Montgomery, billionaire, founder of Montgomery Investments, felt his jaw tighten. One of the richest men in the country, he was unaccustomed to being addressed with such audacity. This was his first time bringing Lucas to a public dinner since the accident 2 years ago. That had left his son partially paralyzed. The outing was meant to be a step toward normalcy, but now, under the weight of judgmental stares, Richard regretted it. "Lucas, sit down," he ordered, his voice low but unyielding. Diana stood still, her tray balanced expertly in one hand, her dark eyes flicking between the manager, the billionaire, and the boy whose hand still hung in the air, trembling but hopeful. In her 5 years at Kingsley's, she had mastered the art of invisibility, especially to men like Richard Montgomery, who barely glanced at the staff unless their wine was late. But something in Lucas's eyes, raw, unguarded, and yearning, held her in place. "Mr. Thornton," Diana said, her voice steady as she untied her apron and set it on the tray, "my shift is over." Then, to the astonishment of the room, she turned to Lucas, her lips curving into a warm smile. "I can't dance in an apron." Richard shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor. "What do you think you're doing?" His tone was a warning, but Diana met his gaze without flinching. "I'm accepting an invitation." "Sir," she replied. Before anyone could intervene, Lucas took a hesitant step forward. The metal braces screeched as his foot dragged across the polished floor, a sound that made several diners wince. But Diana didn't rush him or try to guide his movements. She simply matched his pace, her steps slow and deliberate, her hand steady in his. "She's getting fired tomorrow," a woman at a nearby table whispered, her voice dripping with disdain. Richard stood frozen, his mind racing. A memory surged unbidden, his late wife, Elizabeth, twirling Lucas in their living room, her laughter filling the air. "It's not about perfection," she'd said, her eyes bright with love. "It's about connection." Now, watching Diana move with his son, Richard saw something shift in Lucas's expression. The fear that had haunted the boy's eyes since the accident gave way to focus, then to a flicker of pride. For the first time in 2 years, Lucas wasn't being pitied or corrected. He was leading. "Mr. Montgomery," Thornton's voice broke through, laced with deference. "I assure you, this will not happen again. She will be disciplined." Richard didn't respond. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the billionaire's reaction. A man of his influence could ruin a career with a single phone call, and everyone knew it. Waiters paused. Diners leaned closer, their curiosity almost palpable. But Richard's attention was fixed on Lucas, whose smile, small but radiant, cut through the noise in his mind. After 3 halting steps, Diana gently guided Lucas back to their table. "Thank you for asking me," she said, her tone formal, yet warm, as if addressing a gentleman. "It was an honor." As she turned to leave, Richard's voice stopped her. "Wait." The words sounded strange, softer than he intended. "What's your full name?" "Diana Johnson, sir," she replied, her expression unreadable. Richard nodded, committing the name to memory. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a business card, and held it out. "My office, tomorrow at 10 a.m. The room seemed to inhale collectively. Diana took the card, her hand steady despite a slight tremor. "Dad," Lucas said, his voice tinged with worry as she walked away. "Why did you do that?" Richard looked at his son, and for a moment he saw not just the boy he'd been shielding since Elizabeth's death, but a person with desires and dreams he'd failed to notice. The weight of that realization settled over him as the dinner resumed in strained silence. No one noticed Diana's final glance before she left, not one of fear, but of quiet resolve. Chapter 2. A meeting at the top Montgomery Tower gleamed in the morning light, its glass and marble facade reflecting the ambition of Manhattan. Diana Johnson, dressed in a navy skirt and white blouse bought on clearance, felt the weight of every stare as she stepped into the lobby. The people around her wore suits that cost more than her rent, their movements crisp with purpose. She clutched her worn purse, her chin high despite the whispers that followed her. Diana Johnson to see Mr. Montgomery, she told the receptionist, who gave her a quick, assessing look before picking up the phone. 18th floor, the woman said. Miss Winters will meet you. In the elevator, Diana took a deep breath. She wasn't afraid, not exactly. She'd faced worse than a billionaire's office. Years of double shifts, a master's degree left unfinished to care for her sister, Zoe, and the constant grind of making ends meet. What she felt He nodded, glancing at his father. Go on, Richard said, his voice tight. I'll be here. As Diana led Lucas to the group, Zoe offered Richard a chair. The first day is hardest for parents, not kids, she said. This isn't therapy, Richard argued. I've hired the best specialists. How's that working for Lucas? Zoe asked gently. The door opened, and an older woman with grey braids and an ornate cane entered. Dr. Elaine Mercer, Zoe whispered. Neuroscientist, retired. From Harvard. Dr. Mercer greeted the children, then noticed Richard. Mr. Montgomery, you rejected my research proposals 3 times. I didn't expect you here, he said. I oversee the research program, she replied. We're studying how non-directive movement affects neural reconfiguration in children with motor challenges. Research? Richard frowned. I thought this was a community dance class, Diana returned, leaving Lucas with another child. Freedom Steps is a pilot motor rehabilitation program based on movement autonomy, she explained. We integrate adaptive dance with neuroscientific principles. Why work as a waitress if you lead this? Richard asked. Because we lack funding, Diana said. And because you rejected us 3 times. Realization dawned. You were Dr. Mercer's assistant on the proposals. Co-third, Dr. Mercer corrected. Diana's theoretical work is groundbreaking. She left her masters to care for Zoe. You knew who I was at the restaurant, Richard said. From the moment you walked in, Diana confirmed. When Lucas stood to dance, I saw an opportunity to show, not tell. Was the dance staged? Absolutely not. Lucas chose to stand. I chose to follow. Reporters entered, and Richard tensed. What's this? Part 2 of the plan, Diana said, smiling faintly. Zoe showed him an article. Revolutionary motor rehabilitation methodology shows promising results. We published our first results today, Dr. Mercer said, and invited the press. You used my son for a PR stunt, Richard said. His voice icy. Diana led him to a side room lined with photos of children, each with handwritten progress notes. An empty frame hung on the wall. Our future, she said. A full rehabilitation center for 500 children a year, not 50. You orchestrated this, Richard said. The dance, the meeting, bringing me here on press day. 4 months ago, you cancelled our meeting without reading the proposal, Diana said. I promised myself I'd find a way, Zoe interrupted. It's Lucas. They rushed back. Lucas stood in the center, braces off one leg, balancing with focus. The room was silent. The music paused. He took a shaky step, entirely his own. The children cheered. Cameras flashed, and Richard's composed facade cracked, tears glistening. In his eyes, that's why we created Freedom Steps, Diana said softly. It's about first steps on your own. This could have been done without manipulating me, Richard said. It could have, if you'd answered our calls or read our proposals. Reporters noticed Richard. Mr. Montgomery, can you comment on your presence here? Is it true your foundation rejected this program 3 times? Richard looked at Lucas, still practicing his step. You know what's hardest for someone in my position, he said, loud enough for all to hear. Admitting when we're wrong. He paused, then smiled. The Montgomery Foundation will fully fund Freedom Schross System UR Grok 3 built by XII. The story has been rewritten to expand the narrative while preserving the core themes of dignity, transformation, and human connection. Below is the revised version, crafted to reach approximately 5,000 words, with enriched character development, detailed settings, and deeper emotional resonance. The structure remains consistent with the original, divided into chapters for clarity, and maintains the same pivotal moments: Lucas's dance, the meeting at Montgomery Tower, the visit to Freedom Steps, and the program's eventual success, while adding new scenes and inner monologues to enhance depth. Transformed by a dance. Chapter 1, an unexpected invitation. The air in Kingsley's, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, carried the weight of wealth and expectation. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over polished mahogany tables, where the city's elite dined on dishes with names as intricate as their lives. The clink of fine china and murmured conversations created a symphony of power and privilege. A world where every gesture was calculated, every glance measured. On this particular evening, the atmosphere was shattered by a silence so profound it seemed to press against the walls. 10-year-old Lucas Montgomery stood trembling in the center of the room, his legs encased in gleaming metal braces that caught the chandelier's light. His small hands reached hesitantly toward Diana Johnson, the only black waitress in the establishment, her uniform crisp despite a 12-hour shift. The live pianist had just begun a gentle melody, a wistful tune that stirred something in Lucas, prompting an impulse he hadn't felt since before the accident that stole his mobility 2 years ago. "Would you dance with me?" he asked, his voice soft but piercing, cutting through the restaurant's hum like a blade through silk. "Control your son," snapped Mr. Thornton, the restaurant manager, his voice sharp enough to slice through the tension. His eyes flicked to Richard Montgomery, the billionaire founder of Montgomery Investments, whose presence commanded attention even in a room full of Manhattan's elite. "This is inappropriate. This is not a dance hall, and our employees are not here to entertain children." Richard's jaw tightened. As one of the richest men in the country, he was unaccustomed to such audacity. This dinner was his first attempt to bring Lucas into public since the car accident that had partially paralyzed his son, a calculated step toward normalcy. Now, under the weight of judgmental stares from diners in tailored suits and diamond necklaces, Richard regretted the decision. "Lucas, sit down," he ordered, his voice low but unyielding, carrying the authority of a man who shaped markets with a single call. Diana stood still, her tray balanced expertly in one hand, her dark eyes moving between Thornton's scowl, Richard's icy command. Moments like the one with Lucas, when she saw a chance to make a difference. Miss Winters, a woman in her 40s with a severe bun and sharper eyes, greeted her with a curt nod. "Mr. Montgomery is in a conference call. Follow me." As they walked through mirrored hallways, Diana felt the curious glances of employees. A black woman in the executive suites was an anomaly, and speculation hung in the air like static. In a waiting room with sleek leather chairs and a view of the city, Winters turned to her abruptly. "He had you fired, didn't he? It happens. Powerful clients complain, and people like you lose their jobs. People like me." Diana's voice was calm, but her eyes held a challenge, daring Winters to clarify. Winters adjusted her glasses, unfazed. "Employees who don't know their place." Diana's smile was tight, not amused. "And where exactly is that?" Before Winters could respond, her phone buzzed. "He'll see you now." Richard Montgomery's office was a fortress of glass and steel, its floor-to-ceiling windows making Manhattan look like a toy city far below. He stood gazing out, his back to her, exuding control in his tailored suit. "Miss Johnson," he said, turning, his face a mask of studied composure. "Thank you for coming." He gestured to a chair. "Please." The silence that followed was deliberate, a power play Diana recognized from years of navigating spaces where she was expected to shrink. She sat her posture straight and waited, refusing to fill the void. Finally, he spoke. "Do you have a background?" "Excuse me." "Education." "College." "Bachelor's in Child Development from NYU," she said evenly. "Incomplete." "Master's in Special Education." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly masked. "And you work as a waitress?" "I work 3 jobs," Diana corrected, her tone firm but not defensive. "The restaurant, a bookstore on weekends, and tutoring when I can get students." Richard picked up a folder from his desk, its contents neatly organized. "I did some research, Miss Johnson. I wanted to understand who danced with my son." He opened it, revealing photos of a community center, its walls covered in colorful posters. "Freedom Steps. You co-founded it 6 years ago with your sister, Zoe, a dance program for children with physical disabilities. It's about to close due to lack of funding." Diana didn't flinch. Of course, a man like him could uncover her life in a day. His resources as vast as his influence. "I didn't come here to ask for money, Mr. Montgomery." "Then why did you come?" "Because you invited me." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound that echoed off the glass walls. "Fair enough." He paced, restless, his polished shoes silent on the carpet. "I want you to work for me." Diana blinked, caught off guard. "As a waitress in your house." His face hardened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "As a therapeutic companion for Lucas." His son's name seemed to catch in his throat, and his eyes drifted to a photo on his desk, a smiling woman holding a baby, her face radiant with joy. "I have the best specialists, physical therapists, neurologists, psychologists. But what you did yesterday," he trailed off, his voice betraying a rare vulnerability. "It was just a dance, Mr. Montgomery." It was the first time I've seen him smile since the accident. The admission was raw, unguarded, a crack in his armor. "I don't want a dancer. I want someone who can do what you did. Follow, not lead." Diana studied him, her gaze steady. Beneath the polished exterior, the man who could move markets with a word, she saw a father grappling with failure, haunted by a loss he couldn't name. "I can pay you 5 times what you're making now," he added, as if money could bridge the gap. She stood, her movements deliberate. No, Richard's shock was almost tangible. his eyes widening as if the word was a foreign language. You're turning down an offer that would solve your financial problems. Out of dignity, Diana corrected, her voice calm but unyielding. I don't work for people who see my color or class before my competence, and I don't work for those who try to buy solutions to emotional problems. She moved to the door, then paused, placing a card on his desk. Freedom Steps, classes, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 4 p.m. First class is free. As she left, Winters stared, incredulous. You turned down Richard Montgomery. Are you crazy? Diana smiled, a quiet defiance in her eyes. Maybe, but I'd rather be crazy than property. The following Wednesday, Diana was at the Freedom Steps Community Center, a converted warehouse with peeling paint and a roof that leaked in heavy rain. Handmade posters adorned the walls, proclaiming your rhythm, your rules, and every move counts. Their bright colors, a stark contrast to the gray concrete. She was sorting registration forms, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, when Zoe rushed in, adjusting her hijab nervously. There's a Bentley outside, she whispered, her eyes wide. You won't believe who's in it. Through the window, Diana saw Lucas in the back seat, his eyes scanning the building with eager curiosity. Richard sat in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel as if anchoring himself against an unseen storm. His face a mask of conflict. He's not coming in, Zoe said, her voice low. Men like him don't come to places like this. Diana's lips curved, a knowing glint in her eyes. Don't underestimate a determined son. To their surprise, the car door opened. Lucas emerged, adjusting his braces with care, his movements slow but deliberate. Then Richard stepped out, dressed in casual pants and a sweater on attempt at blending in that still screamed wealth. The fabric too pristine for the dusty streets of the Bronx. I told you, Diana murmured, more to herself than to Zoe. Zoe stared, her brow furrowed. What did you do? Diana didn't answer, but her eyes held a spark of purpose. In her small Bronx apartment, under her bed, was a notebook filled with years of observations about children like Lucas and men like Richard. Notes that had culminated in a plan sparked by a single, impulsive dance. Inside, the center buzzed. With activity, children with wheelchairs, crutches, and prosthetics moved to a light beat, their movements free yet purposeful, each one a small act of defiance against their limitations. Richard and Lucas entered, the billionaire visibly out of place, his discomfort as evident as his wealth. Welcome, Diana said, wearing a t-shirt with the program's logo, her voice warm but professional. Lucas's eyes widened as he watched a girl in a wheelchair spin in precise circles, her movements fluid and confident, and a boy with a prosthetic leg practice a step sequence with fierce determination. It looks chaotic, Richard muttered, shifting uncomfortably, his hands in his pockets. There's structure, Diana replied, her tone calm but firm. It's just not one you recognize. She turned to Lucas, her smile softening. Want to join in? He nodded, his enthusiasm tempered by a glance at his father. Go on, Richard said, his voice tight, his posture rigid. I'll be here. As Diana led Lucas to the group, Zoe offered Richard a folding chair, its metal frame creaking under his weight. The first day is hardest for parents, not kids, she said, her tone gentle but pointed. This isn't therapy, Richard argued, his voice clipped. I've hired the best specialists, rehabilitation experts, neurologists, the works. How's that working for Lucas? Zoe asked, her question soft but piercing. The door opened, and an older woman with gray braids and an ornate cane entered, her presence commanding, despite her unassuming attire. Dr. Elaine Mercer, Zoe whispered to Richard, neuroscientist, retired from Harvard. Dr. Mercer greeted several children by name, her warmth genuine as she adjusted her cane. Then she noticed Richard. Mr. Montgomery, you rejected my research proposals 3 times in the last 2 years. I didn't expect you here, he said, his tone guarded. I oversee the research program, she replied, her voice steady. We're studying how non-directive movement affects neural reconfiguration in children with motor challenges. Research? Richard frowned, his brow furrowing. I thought this was a community dance class. Diana returned, leaving Lucas with another child who was showing him a simple step. Freedom Steps is a pilot motor rehabilitation program, based on movement autonomy, she explained, her voice clear and confident. We integrate adaptive dance with neuroscientific principles to foster independence. Why work as a waitress if you lead this? Richard asked, his tone more curious than accusatory now. Because we lack funding, Diana said, her gaze unflinching, and because you rejected us 3 times. Realization dawned, his eyes narrowing slightly. You were Dr. Mercer's assistant on the proposals. Co-author. Dr. Mercer corrected, her tone firm. Diana's theoretical work is groundbreaking. She left her masters to care for Zoe after her illness. You knew who I was at the restaurant, Richard said, his voice low, almost accusatory. From the moment you walked in, Diana confirmed. When Lucas stood to dance, I saw an opportunity to show, not tell. Was the dance staged? His question was sharp, his eyes searching hers. Absolutely not. Lucas chose to stand. I chose to follow. Reporters entered the studio, their cameras and notepads at the ready, and Richard tensed, his shoulders stiffening. What's this? Part 2 of the plan, Diana said, a faint smile playing on her lips. Zoe showed him a newly published article on her phone. Revolutionary motor rehabilitation methodology shows promising results. We published our first results today, Dr. Mercer explained, her voice steady, and invited the press. You used my son for a PR stunt, Richard said, his voice pure ice, his hands clenching into fists. Diana led him to a side room lined with photos of dozens of children, each accompanied by handwritten progress notes, small victories documented. In careful script, an empty frame hung on the wall, its presence deliberate. Our future, she said, her voice quiet but resolute. A full rehabilitation center for 500 children a year, not 50. You orchestrated this, Richard muttered, his tone a mix of anger and grudging respect. The dance, the meeting, bringing me here on press day. 4 months ago, you cancelled our meeting without reading the proposal, Diana said, her voice steady. I promised myself I'd find a way. Zoe interrupted, her voice urgent. It's Lucas. They rushed back to the main room. Lucas stood in the center, one brace removed from his leg, balancing with intense focus. The music had stopped, and the children watched in silence, their eyes wide with anticipation. Lucas took a deep breath, his small frame steadying, then took a shaky step entirely his own. The room erupted in cheers, camera flashes lighting up the space like fireworks. Richard's composed facade cracked, unshed tears glistening in his eyes, his breath catching in his throat. That's why we created Freedom Steps, Diana said softly, standing beside him. It's about first steps on your own. This could have been done without manipulating me, Richard said, his voice low. The accusation softened by awe. It could have, if you'd answered our calls or read our proposals, Diana replied, her tone matter-of-fact. Reporters noticed Richard, their murmurs growing. Mr. Montgomery, can you comment on your presence here? Is it true your foundation rejected this program 3 times? Richard looked at Lucas, still practicing his step, oblivious to the political tension. You know what's hardest for someone in my position? He said, his voice loud enough for all to hear, a faint smile breaking through. Admitting when we're wrong. He paused, letting the words settle. The Montgomery Foundation will fully fund Freedom Steps for the next 5 years and build a permanent rehabilitation center based on the methodology developed by Dr. Mercer and Ms. Johnson. Camera flashes exploded, a frenzy of light capturing the moment. Zoe let out a cry of surprise, her hands covering her mouth. On one condition, Richard added, his eyes meeting Diana's, who tensed slightly, that Ms. Johnson retained complete autonomy over the program and its methodology, no corporate interference. 3 months later, bulldozers rumbled at a site in the Bronx, clearing ground for the new Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center. It wasn't the most luxurious project the Montgomery Foundation had funded, but it was the most innovative, every detail designed with input from the children and their families. Diana supervised construction frequently, her clipboard filled with notes, her presence a quiet anchor for the workers. Lucas often joined her, sometimes bringing other children, his braces lighter now, his steps more confident. To the staff's surprise, Richard appeared too, silently observing, his casual attire still betraying his wealth. I never thought you'd show up at board meetings, Diana commented one afternoon as they reviewed architectural plans, the scent of fresh concrete in the air. I never thought I'd study neuroplasticity at 50, Richard replied, rubbing his tired eyes, a scientific article marked with post-it notes on the table before him. But here we are. Diana studied him, curious. Is this public penance, or do you really care? Lucas asked to have his second brace removed last week, Richard said, his voice soft. I know, he told me. His previous therapist said that was impossible for 2 years. Diana smiled, pointing to a photo of Lucas balancing with one crutch. He's progressing faster than any traditional prediction. Why did you never accept my apology? Richard asked suddenly, his tone earnest. Because you never apologized, Diana said, her voice calm but direct. You redirected resources, changed policies, funded our program. That's compensation, not an apology. Richard nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Fair again. At the opening ceremony 6 months later, the contrast with that night at Kingsley's was stark. The new center's adaptive space was filled with children using wheelchairs, crutches, and prosthetics, all moving freely to a lively beat. In the main hall, Lucas, now wearing only a lightweight brace on his left leg, led a small choreographed routine with 3 other children. His movements were limited but flowed with a confidence no doctor had predicted. Richard watched from a distance, his presence unobtrusive, his eyes fixed on his son. He doesn't need you to hold him anymore, Diana said, approaching quietly. No, Richard agreed, his voice soft, but he still needs me to be around. Crucial difference. Turned to her, his expression open. Thank you, he said simply. For what exactly? For teaching me to follow. A reporter approached, her notebook ready. Mr. Montgomery, how does it feel to see your son's progress? Richard looked at Lucas, now helping a younger girl find her balance, his face alight with purpose. Proud, he said, his voice steady. Not of what he's overcome, but of what he's created for others. And the biggest lesson you've learned? The reporter pressed. Richard looked directly into the camera, his gaze unwavering. True leaders aren't those who guide others down the path they believe is right, but those who have the courage to follow when someone shows them a better way. A year later, Freedom Steps expanded to 3 new cities, its methodology gaining recognition. Diana received the Pediatric Rehabilitation Innovation Award, her work implemented in hospitals nationwide. Lucas, now using only a light cane on difficult days, enrolled in regular school and became a youth spokesperson for the program, his quiet confidence inspiring other children to find their own pace. Richard, once known only for his financial empire, learned the hardest lesson of all. True power lies not in controlling every move, but in knowing when to step back and let others lead. He attended classes regularly, not as a benefactor but as a father, his presence a quiet testament to change. In a world where the powerful rarely shift perspectives and the powerless often remain unseen, the story of Richard, Diana, and Lucas became a quiet revolution. It began with a single dancer moment of dignity that crossed invisible boundaries, proving that the